Hello and welcome to Antigua and Barbuda Intellectual Property and Commerce Office's video series entitled Conversations on Intellectual Property, under the theme Intellectual Property and Sustainable Development Goals, Building a Common Future with Innovation and Creativity. The Intellectual Property and Commerce Office is more commonly known as a BIPCO, or the Intellectual Property and Commerce Registry, located in St. John City on St. John Street in the Gem of the Caribbean. My name is Kyle Kentish, and I am the Deputy Registrar at the Intellectual Property and Commerce Registry. For this conversation, I'll be speaking with Ms. Arica Hill, outgoing Executive Director of the Environmental Awareness Group, environmentalist extraordinaire, very verdantly dressed, and soon to be the Caribbean lead at Fauna and Flora. Welcome, Ms. Arica Hill.
Thank you.
You're most welcome, dear. Please introduce yourself and tell us about your background.
All right. So, as you've mentioned, my name is Arica Hill, and I have been working in the environmental field since 2009. I moved over to the Department of Environment when I was actually working in tourism.
Okay.
So my first love has always been kind of connecting people to Antigua and Barbuda, which is why I was in tourism.
Right.
But then I realized that there was, for me, a personal gap between what was done in tourism and what's done in the environment, and that sometimes those two things don't overlap.
Right.
And so I then moved over to the Department of Environment, and I stayed there as an Environment Education Officer for a number of years.
Okay.
And now I have transitioned out of the government system and into the nonprofit system, which is the Environmental Awareness Group, which is Antigua and Barbuda's longest standing environmental NGO.
So how did you get involved in this area of work?
So I think it's a myriad of things. For one thing, as I mentioned before, tourism kind of takes you outside of, well, it should take you outside of your comfort zone.
Right.
But also I've grown up in a household that's very much about kind of loving and learning about where we are. So Antigua and Barbuda in general. So I've always enjoyed just kind of getting to know my country. And the more you get to know your country, the more you realize that there are gaps in what is done. And the more you realize that if you sit and just let it happen, then you are really not a part of the solution.
Right.
I don't believe in that.
Right.
So I wanted to I don't want to say I wanted to be the change I want to see, because that's really
Cliche, huh?
okay. Just a tip.
Okay.
But I figured that I could do something.
Yeah.
And so entering the environmental field, I had no idea what I was doing, despite the fact that I was hired as an environment education officer.
Okay.
And I think I spent a lot of time learning on the job.
Right.
And the more I went outside, the more I saw things, the more I snorkeled, the more I walked through the bush, the more I fell in love with Antigua and Barbuda, and the more I wanted to protect it.
I follow you. Any educational background that you have that would have led you also to being an environmentalist?
Well, during my tourism degree, there's a whole portion that's on sustainable tourism.
Okay.
And that kind of was the first spark of interest. And what I then did was, when I was working with the Department of Environment, I went off to do my master's in environmental management and sustainable development. And I guess that kind of then solidified a lot of the learnings that I had while doing the work.
Right. Of course. That's lovely. So, this year, on the 26th of April, just around the corner, we're going to observe World Intellectual Property Day 2024. It's going to give us an opportunity to explore how intellectual property and the Sustainable Development Goals can encourage and amplify the innovative and creative solutions that are so crucial to building our common future. So, has intellectual property benefited the work that you do?
I think there are a couple ways that I can see that connection.
Okay.
For one thing, in this field, especially in the environmental field, it is not commonly people that look like me and sound like me that are a part of the solution. Traditionally, and I think it's a feeling that people have, that environmentalists tend to be rich white people who are going to come in, they fly in, they have on their little cargo shorts, they do their little thing, and then they fly out with all of their resources. And so what a lot of my work has been, especially with the EAG, has been creating our own material that looks and sounds like us. So I can reference our Into the Wild series, which was designed to take young people. It's a complete YouTube series that takes young people out into our natural environment to meet the critically endangered Antiguan racer for the first time, see people snorkeling and that kind of thing. But created around that is music that sounds like us, is imagery that is of people that look like us with the bits of dialect in there. And I think for us, from an intellectual property standpoint, being able to own that material is very important. Being able to kind of make a stamp that this is EAGs, and also be able to share it then more broadly, is very important to us. So that's from one standpoint. And then the other standpoint is that as an environmental NGO, for us to earn a living and to raise money, we have to be able to prove that we have gone through the rigor of submitting documents to a BIPCO. And without that, we are very often unable to do anything, right? So, because international agencies, they're not just like, yes, I want to give everyone money, but they want to give it to somebody who they're sure of, someone who they know, yes, that they're gonna be there tomorrow and haven't just kind of run off with their money, right? So even in that standpoint, so I guess from both a creative standpoint, it's been important, and then also from a everyday let me function, it has been very important. And so I think that being able to own, especially our own intellectual property, is very important.
Of course. If I may say, that is so good. So, the United Nations has identified 17 Sustainable Development Goals. In short, they are no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice and strong institutions, and partnerships for the goals. What does sustainable development mean to you?
It's interesting that they've separated all those things to me, because I think a lot of who we are is tied into all of those things. So from a standpoint as an environmentalist, I think it's easy to pick out the ones, right? And you go like, oh yes, of course, sanitation and energy, life below water and land, but even the whole idea of equity and making sure that each person has access to these things. Because while it is important to safeguard wildlife, which is a critical part of the work that the EAG does and a critical part of the work that environmentalists do, it's important that people have access to that, that there is harmony between us and wildlife, and that we also have access to the information that allows us to do this work. So within our sustainable development, there's also a requirement as governments and as NGOs to prepare information that is accessible to all people, right? And once people have access to that, it means that they have the ability to have agency. They can then say, I have an issue with this, I want to solve this, I want to help here. If they don't have that access to information, then it doesn't matter if you are saving every species because they can't then be a part of that process. So for me, sustainable development means that each person is a part of the process. Wherever you may sit within that system, you must be a part of the process. And it doesn't mean that everybody needs to go outside and hold an Antiguan racer and love it up.
Or hug a tree.
Or hug a tree. I'm not saying that. If you so choose, you are welcome.
Right.
But if you don't want to, you still must be able to access the information that gives you the ability to respond.
Of course, of course. You know, the United Nations has also identified the fact that in order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, we need to rethink how we live, work, and play. And so, somewhat along those lines, how do you believe intellectual property, can support the achievement of Sustainable Development Goals? You've maybe somewhat touched on this before, but maybe to expand a little briefly on how you think intellectual property can specifically help us to achieve the goals.
So I think within the Caribbean context, for one thing, I do believe that sustainable development must look and sound like us.
Yeah.
And a lot of how we have developed or how we are told to develop is very westernized. So it doesn't sound like soca or calypso. It doesn't include fungi and saltfish. It doesn't feel like us.
Yeah.
And I think within the creative space particularly, there is so much work that people are doing that seeks to kind of connect people through making them know, like, this is a part of us, this is a part of our culture. And I think that if intellectual property is able to support actions that generally ensure that connectivity, I think that's useful. So I think there's a lot that can be done, is probably what I'm saying. And I think there's support that needs to be offered to people who want to ensure that sustainable development happens.
Right.
So my additional caveat to that is, because we've been told what development needs to look like, it's not sustained. Because how am I going to do the thing that's not me?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You're asking people to completely change themselves to
Right.
fit into something.
Right.
Instead, I think that even within our system of intellectual property and how we require our NGOs to function, how we require us to all do business, must be reflective of who we are as people.
Right.
And then tell the rest of the world that this is what we're doing.
I'm following you.
And you follow us.
Yeah, in a sense, yeah. Let's do it and do it so good that we set an example for you.
Correct.
Yeah, I follow you. If our common future is a shared road, if it can be imagined as a shared road ahead, then how do you envision your field of work helping to build that road?
So I think what EAG has been able to do, and what my work is focused on, is that building of partnerships and understanding that shared road is not determined by any one individual. So even within programs that, again, I love to reference the Antiguan racer, because as much as we love it, people are very much afraid of snakes, right?
Of course, yeah.
And so it's very easy to kind of go like, I don't really want to deal with that.
Right.
But for us to manage the Antiguan racer, it's not just up to EAG, right? It's up to a range of partners, the Department of Environment, Department of Fisheries, you think of international partners, local tour operators, landowners. It's many people who have to come together and do this one thing.
Yeah.
And so for me, even within this space of environmental management and understanding this road that we're all on, it's again understanding that all voices must contend for us to be able to make a determination of where we're going and how we're going. I think that it's And it's so important because even within, often, because we are quote unquote tree huggers,
Right.
we're often put on one end. Let's not lie.
Yeah,
Right?
we will.
So people think that as soon as we show up that we just want to say no to what your view of development is. And if we just would have a conversation, perhaps where we would go would be a bit different. And so I guess within my context, again, is consistently, can we just do it together? And can we ensure that all of the people who need to be a part of the process are included in the process? And I think once we're on that road, and that's what environmentalism is focused on, because it is focused on ensuring that there is equity. Once that's done, we're good to go, man.
Of course, man. I mean, on the note of inclusivity, what advice would you give to anyone trying to effect change, in particular in relation to the environment, or just in relation to the achievement of our sustainable development goals?
I generally tell people just do one thing.
What's that?
Any one thing. Choose.
Ah.
Just choose. I think sometimes, like when you go somewhere and there's like, let's think of like 5 different snacks on a table.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my goodness, do I want chips or potatoes or do I want peanuts? Yeah. Okay, just pick something. Right? You don't need to take all.
Yeah.
You don't need to do everything.
Right.
Do the one thing and do it well, do it consistently, and tell other people that you've done it. And somebody else is going to do that one thing, and then there's a chain reaction. So even if your one thing is that your simplest thing is that you're just going to use a reusable water bottle, you're not going to buy 10 of them. You're just going to use that one and wash it. Because soap and water exists, so we don't need to buy a new one each time.
Correct.
Right? So if that's the thing that you're going to do, that's great.
Yeah.
Or if you want to get a little more involved,
and
you decide, okay, I want to learn how to assist the EAG with tracking birds and tracking lizards and tracking snakes. You want to do that with us? That's also an option. But you don't have to do all the things. Just choose one.
Just choose one. And speaking of learning, how can we learn more about what you're doing?
Excellent question. And I always love to plug
that
you can follow the EAG at EAG Antigua. You can find us on Instagram, on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on LinkedIn. You can't miss us.
That's all of them. Definitely not.
The only one we're not on is TikTok.
Okay, yes. Well, fair enough.
But you know.
Yeah.
Soon.
Soon enough. Let me know. Miss Arica Hill, it has been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you.